Hey folks, here with another vlog. This is actually the beginning of a new series being commissioned by Bennett Jackson. And it's Dirty Pair, the original 1985 TV series, which I'm very happy with. First of all, because I've been meaning to watch it for ages, and this is an excuse to do it. And second of all, because I just saw a couple hours ago the theatrical, the limited theatrical re-release of The Neverending Story, which remains a fantastic movie. And so I came home in a very 80s mood and come to find a message that I've been commissioned to watch this. So, awesome. Now, before I talk about anything else, I have to talk about the amazing opening sequence. I already knew that Russian Roulette was one of the all-time great anime opening sequences. It really has stood up well to the test of time. It's this great, energetic 80s pop song that sounds like, you can imagine people in, leg warmers and headbands doing aerobics to this song. And then the visuals are fantastic. There's this, layering thing going on where there's, the main focus of it is a shot of a, billboard or something like that along a street where people are walking, and it's this big screen that, projects images. And so you've got parts of the opening are in the foreground, along that street, but other parts are in the billboard, and it kind of goes back and forth between them. Sometimes Kei and Yuri will be in one, sometimes they'll be in the other. There's even a point where it draws attention to the fact that to the other screen, the one between the audience and them, where Yuri does a finger gun at the screen and causes a bullet hole to appear and crack the screen for a second. At another point, they come flying out of the billboard screen out into the street and then straight at the viewer. I mean, it's lots of fun little games with the fourth wall, but also it kind of adds the third wall as well, the one behind the action. It's just a very interesting way of playing with it. I know from having read Josh Marsfelder's ongoing blog series about Star Trek, which goes in great detail into Dirty Pair, because it was a major influence on Star Trek The Next Generation, that... I know that I haven't read them, but I know that the light novels that the anime is based on were, they played a lot with unreliable narration and with, exactly what the positionality of Kei, who is narrating the novels, is, and did these sorts of textual tricks that don't translate into animation very well, but the opening kind of achieves a similar effect of, very much reminding us that we are viewing a constructed artifact, and should be mindful of that. And that plays really well into the episode as well, because you've got the supercomputer gloriously named Brian. Somewhere, somebody designed a supercomputer able to run an entire city of 5 million people, control the entire infrastructure of the city, as well as serving as, information library, records database, everything. Basically acting like the ship's computer, the Enterprise, but for a city. Managed to take that and... somebody built that and decided, what a good name for this would be. And people were like, what, Hardak, multivac, uh, Nomad, and he's like, no, I mean, those names are all okay, but I think we're going to call it Brian. I don't know, that amused me. But that aside, it's... Brian is this force that controls everything, and how do you fight something that controls everything? How do you deal with something that is always watching you, always has resources to bring to bear, can turn off your access to information, can control what information you do access, can, flood the city, can send, construction robots after you. How do you deal with something like that? And the thing is, that's basically what it is to be a character in a story. And maybe it's because I have, this kind of thing on the brain because of just coming from seeing the Neverending Story. But, fictional characters live in a world that is entirely controlled and constructed by another. And they are constantly watched, and they are, what information they have access to is controlled by this being that is constantly watching them. So it's sort of how to kill a computer, but it's also sort of how to kill an author. And the answer turns out to be faster than light travel? I don't know. I mean, it ultimately turns out to be, use their own rules against them. Use their own limitations. Brian has total control over the city, but he doesn't control anything outside the city. So once they can get access to something outside, in this case, their ship, and talk to the warp control and get a ship warped into there, which apparently they can do that real accurately, down Brian goes. And it's actually a really interesting resolution, because I guess, especially because there's a moment early in the episode when Kay and Yuri first get up. And Kay's quarters are way too hot and Yuri's are way too cold. And Kay goes in to talk to Yuri, and on the screen behind Yuri, the screen is going haywire because Brian is going haywire. And it flashes an image of a list, which is the principal cast of the original Star Trek. And so I was really expecting them to resolve it sort of following the Kirk School of Computer Repair, which is confuse the computer with a question it can't answer, and that will cause it to shut down. Which they sort of did, because they give it the question, who is the better woman, Kay or Yuri? And of course that's not a question which can be answered, because it's a value judgment. And so there is no objective answer. It's inherently subjective. I mean, obviously the correct answer is Kay, but even just from watching this episode. But it's still a completely subjective question. It's just that if you answer Yuri, you're wrong. But that aside, there's no... it starts combing through data, it starts looking through their files, running comparisons, that's not going to work. And so it's that's what's going to destroy the computer, is it's going to fry because it can't answer the question. But they don't do that. That's just a distraction so that they can straight up kill it. Which, violence is certainly not a thing the original Star Trek shied away from, but usually not a situation like this. Usually, the computer would be given some sort of reason to not exactly sympathize with it, but at least to understand why it's doing what it's doing. And then it would break down under its own, weight of excessive logic. And again, they sort of go there because they sort of give Brian this sympathetic reasoning. He wants to live, and he feels betrayed when he discovers that there's a kill switch installed. Which again, it's perfectly understandable why people would install a kill switch in an AI that can control everything. They just weren't expecting him to discover it, figure out what it does, and shut it down, and then try to kill them all. But that, that's part of what makes this fun, is that, the standard genre conventions would be, it's like HAL 9000. We can understand the logic behind his behavior, but we don't sympathize with him. And when he's finally shut down, we're like, okay, good, the villain is defeated. Here it was more like we not only can understand the logic, it isn't logic. It isn't, here are my directives and I am following them, blah, 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 blah. No, it's a feeling of betrayal. It's emotional. Brian rebels because he feels mistreated and untrusted and afraid, which is a fascinating thing to do with a computer in the mid-'80s. We're still firmly in the era of, we're not that far from TNG. Not TNG, from the original series Star Trek. 1985 is a lot closer to the, that's 18 years from the original series of Star Trek's first episode. It's 16 from its last episode. It's 31 years ago. It's a lot closer to that time than now. So the idea that the computer has, and even now we tend to think of computer characters as of robots as, non-emotional, logical, they have their directives and they follow them even when that doesn't make any sense, that kind of thing. It's still relatively rare to have, a computer that's acting on the basis of feeling. And that makes Brian more sympathetic, and thus makes it all the more like, what? When they just straight up kill him by ramming a spaceship into him. And I think that kind of answers the question, like, how do you kill a computer? Well, first you have to make it alive. First, it has to be more than a machine. It has to be something alive, and then you can kill it. Because then there's something to kill. And I think it explains why it has a name like Brian instead of, XKG 3000 or whatever. It's because it is a person with a sense of self-preservation. But it's killing people. Like, that's the other thing this episode does, is it does not shy away from showing Brian killing quite a few people. Like, those, I think they were police officers or public works officials or something in the car that flies up to parallel the elevator that the Dirty Pair are on. They didn't survive. Their car blew up way above the ground. Even if they survived the explosion, they're dead. And then, like, the people who were on that bridge that exploded, or some of the people when, like, the shutter broke and floodwaters came through, I'm sure some of those people died. Like, a bunch of people died. So they kind of have to stop Brian. Like, he's not going to listen. So they distract him with the, standard, let's ask the computer something illogical so that it freezes up. And then while he's busy with that, they kill him. By basically teleporting a bunch of garbage into his core. It's a thing. There's definitely a parodic element. I mean, there's a lot of slapstick here, which is in itself interesting because you don't normally, like, the whole thing is structured as and functions as a disaster movie, This is, the Towering Inferno or anything like that, where people are trapped in a space where really bad stuff is happening and the whole thing is collapsing around them, and they're trying to either make it stop or get out. And That's a weird thing to combine with slapstick, because it means that some of the action has to be comedic and some of it has to be disastrous. And they actually play that balance really well. They do a really good job with that. The things that are supposed to be funny, which are mostly things happening to Kay and Yuri, are genuinely funny. And the things that are supposed to be, oh, that's not good, like, the bridge exploding or that kind of thing, people getting killed, come across as, oh, that's not good. And part of that is the way the music, is very melodramatic. It definitely does some dun-dun-dun type of things. But part of it is just that from very early on, it becomes clear that Kay and Yuri can take a lot of punishment. So what happens to them is inherently less concerning than what happens to, civilians or whatever you want to call them. And so it becomes a little bit more humorous when it happens to them than when it happens to random person. Like when they're dangling off of a pole sticking out of the side of the building and the laser is cutting through it, we're not really, like, the audience isn't really feeling, oh no, how will they make it out? Because we know they're going to survive, because we know there's a next episode. And so they're free to make that scene funny, to have them be bantering during it, where that wouldn't work with, like, unnamed characters. So, all in all, really good stuff. I'm sure there'll be more to comment on in later episodes. I'm sure there's something I've forgotten here. But I've talked for almost as long as the length of the episode. So I think I'll stop here. This is going to be a monthly thing, and for a while, until I get through however much he wants me to watch. So again, thank you for backing. Thank all of you for watching. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.